There's something really strange about money. You might not be spending that much. You're not impulsively buying things, but by the end of the month, you still feel like your money just went somewhere you didn't fully control. It's not an obvious loss. It's more of a vague feeling, like your life is fine, but somehow it still doesn't feel light. I realized something. This isn't really about how much you earn. It's something deeper, about the way we unconsciously agree to spend money every day. Most people don't notice this. We don't just spend money through actions. We also spend money through decisions we don't even recognize as decisions. Here's a simple example. You don't remember choosing to spend more, but somehow your life is set up in a way where almost everything costs money by default. You get used to things like going out means spending, meeting friends means spending, feeling tired means you deserve a treat. Weekends mean you have to go out just to not feel bored, and there's nothing wrong with any of that. But what's interesting is you didn't consciously choose each of those things. You're just living inside a default script that you accepted a long time ago. And then money keeps flowing out, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because you never stop to ask, do I actually want to live like this? Main idea. You're not really spending money. You're maintaining a pre-selected lifestyle. I realize something that very few people say out loud. Most of your spending doesn't come from new decisions. It comes from decisions you already made in the past, and now you're just maintaining them. For example, you don't think of yourself as deciding how to spend money every month, but in reality, you already made that decision when you chose where you live, the people you spend time with, your habits for entertainment, how you unwind after work. Each of those choices doesn't just affect you once. It creates a repeating pattern of spending. And what's interesting is, once that pattern is set, you no longer feel like you're choosing. You're just continuing. Here's a very real-life example. Some people aren't reckless with money at all. They're consistent, disciplined, but their life is structured in a way where almost every normal activity comes with a cost, not because they want to spend, but because their environment makes spending the default. They don't feel like they're making decisions. They just feel like they're living their life. And that's why you can control small expenses, but still feel like you have no control overall, because the problem isn't in each action. It's in the system behind those actions. The key takeaway: you're not really spending money every day. You're paying for a version of life you chose a long time ago. Main idea 2. Feeling fine is what makes you stop paying attention to money. I realized something a bit paradoxical. The moment your finances start to feel a little more comfortable is exactly when you start paying less attention to them. Not because you're careless, but because nothing feels wrong. You're still paying your bills. You still have some money left. There's no immediate pressure. And what's interesting is that feeling of nothing's wrong is what makes you stop questioning things. You stop asking, why am I spending on this? If I cut this out, would anything really change? Am I choosing this or just continuing it? You slowly shift from awareness to autopilot. Here's a simple example. There are expenses you used to think about carefully, but after a few months, they become normal. You don't feel like you're deciding anymore. You just think, it's just there. No pain, no pressure, so you leave it alone. But here's the problem. Money doesn't disappear because of what gets your attention. It disappears because of what stops getting your attention. Most people don't realize the most persistent expenses aren't the big or impulsive ones. They're the stable ones, the repeating ones, the ones that never get questioned again. They don't bother you, so you never touch them. And over time, they become part of your normal life. And no one cuts back on what feels normal. The key takeaway: it's not financial pressure that makes you lose control. It's the feeling that everything is fine that makes you stop controlling it. Main idea 3. Your brain doesn't see it as losing money, it sees it as maintaining normal. I realized something very subtle. When you spend money on familiar things, your brain doesn't feel like you're losing money. It just feels like you're keeping things the way they are. It sounds small, but it completely changes how you spend. For example, if you buy something totally new, you think about it. You hesitate. You feel it clearly. I'm spending money. But if it's something you're used to, that feeling disappears. You don't feel like you're spending. You feel like I'm just continuing. And what's interesting is your brain is designed to prefer stability. It doesn't like change. It doesn't want to reevaluate everything all the time. So anything that becomes a habit, it tries to keep it that way, even if it's quietly costing you money. Most people don't realize the feeling of financial control doesn't come from spending less or more. It comes from whether you can still see your decisions. When an expense is no longer seen as a decision, it becomes almost impossible to change. And that's why you can be very aware with new expenses, but completely blind to old ones. Not because you lack discipline, but because your brain is trying to help you. Avoid overthinking. The key takeaway: you don't lose control because you spend too much. You lose control when you stop realizing that you're spending. Main idea 3. Your brain doesn't hate losing money. It hates having to think. I realized something pretty straightforward. People don't always want to save money, but almost always they want to think less. And money often becomes the thing that gets sacrificed for that convenience. Most people don't notice this. A lot of spending decisions don't come from real needs. They come from this simple thought: this is just easier. Here's a very real example. You could spend 10 to 15 minutes thinking through a cheaper option, but after a long, tiring day, you don't want to compare. You don't want to calculate. You don't want to think anymore. So you go with what's familiar, faster, less mental effort. And just like that, the money's gone. Not because you lack discipline, but because your brain is optimizing for ease. What's interesting is, the more tired you are, the busier your day is, the more decisions you've already made, the more likely you are to spend in the way that requires the least thinking. And those expenses usually aren't big, but they repeat very consistently, very quietly, and over time, you start to feel, I don't even spend that much. So why do I never have anything left? That's because you're not buying big things. You're buying simplicity, and you're paying for it every single day. The key takeaway: you don't spend money because you want the thing. You spend money because you don't want to think about it. Main idea 4. You don't lack money. You lack a pause before you spend. I realized something very small, but it completely changes how you see money. The problem isn't that you don't know how to control your spending. It's that you rarely have the chance to. It sounds strange, but pay attention. A lot of spending decisions happen almost instantly. No thinking space, no real consideration, not even a second to step back. It's just, see arrow feels reasonable, arrow do it. Tired arrow want comfort arrow, spend available arrow, just use it. Everything happens fast. Most people don't notice this. It's not that they spend too much. It's that they don't have a clear enough pause to realize they're spending it all. Here's a simple example. There are times you open your phone, not to buy anything, but a few minutes later, you've already completed a purchase. No prior intention, no plan, just a smooth chain of actions. And what's interesting is, the less friction there is in spending, the less aware you are that you're spending, the more convenient it feels, the harder it is to control. Not because you lack willpower, but because the system around you is designed so you never have to stop. And without that pause, you never get the chance to choose differently. The key takeaway: you don't lose money because of bad decisions. You lose money because you never had enough time to make a decision in the first place. Main idea 5. You're not undisciplined. You're living in a system that makes spending feel natural. I realized something a lot of people blame themselves for, but it's not entirely true. They think their problem is lack of discipline, lack of control, lack of willpower. But what's interesting is, even highly disciplined people in their work can still lose control with money, not because they're weak, but because their environment is designed to make spending incredibly easy. Most people don't notice this. You're not just managing money. You're living inside a system that constantly pushes you toward spending. Payments take one tap. Recommendations show up right when you're tired. The easiest option is often the more expensive one. Everything is optimized so you don't have to think. You don't have to try to spend. You just have to not resist, and then the money goes. Here's a very real example. There are days you had no intention of buying anything, but with just a few quick taps, a few small decisions that felt totally reasonable in the moment. At the end of the day, you look back and think, wait, I spent more than I thought. No obvious mistake, no big decision, just a chain of the easiest choices. And what's interesting is, humans naturally lean toward the easiest option. That's not a flaw. That's how the brain works. The problem is, in today's world, the easiest option is rarely the one that helps you keep your money. The key takeaway: you're not losing because you're weak. You're losing because you're playing in a system where spending is the default. Main idea. 6. You don't need to control everything. You just need to change a few defaults. I realized something really important. People who are good with money aren't the ones who think more. They're the ones who have to think less about money in their daily life. It sounds backward, but what's interesting is they don't try to control every expense. They just change a few small things. So most financial decisions happen in the right direction automatically. Most people don't notice this. Your life runs on defaults. How you spend, how you save, how you react when money comes in, all of it has a default setting. And if that default isn't good, you'll have to fight against it every single day. But willpower isn't reliable. Here's a simple example. Some people have to try to save every month. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't, while others don't have to try at all. Money is moved automatically the moment they get paid, not because they're better, but because their system was designed that way. One person is fighting every month, the other is flowing with the system, and over time, the one flowing with the system always feels lighter and lasts longer. The key takeaway: you don't need to control every decision. You just need to change a few defaults so everything else runs on its own. I realized a lot of people think their problem with money is that they don't earn enough or they're not disciplined enough. But if you look closer, the real issue isn't in the big decisions. It's in the small things, repeated every day, that you barely even notice. You don't lose money because of one big mistake. You lose money because of a small system quietly running in the background that you've never questioned. You don't need to change your entire life. You don't need to become perfect with money. You just need to pause for a moment. Look at what's happening on autopilot, the things you're maintaining, without questioning anymore, and choose to change. Just one small point, because what's interesting is, when one default changes, the entire system behind it starts to shift, and eventually, you stop feeling like your money is just disappearing. You start to see clearly where your money is going and why. If any part of this video felt familiar to how you're living with money, leave a like. And if you want to understand more deeply how money really works in your everyday life, consider subscribing. I'll keep sharing the things most people overlook, but that quietly shape how you keep your money.